Hello. I hope the semester is going well for you so far. I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the final paper. The final paper is the culminating requirement for the class, and the goal in that final paper is that you are able to produce a peer-reviewed conference paper. What does that mean? That means that we want your final paper to be able to be submitted to an academic conference, and then if accepted, Johns Hopkins has funding that will allow you to go to the conference and present your paper and share your findings and mingle with the other academics that are there. So what goes into making a conference paper? Well, first of all, don't get alarmed. It's not like a 30-page paper. It's not a thesis. A conference paper usually varies in length from about 4 to 8 pages, depending on the conference. So, shoot for 6. There's a specific format we're going to look at in a minute. And the main thing you have to communicate in a conference paper is some contribution. What does contribution mean? It means you're telling somebody something that's new or novel, something somebody doesn't know. Now, there can be a couple ways of doing that. It could be you are exploring a particular data set. For example, there might be some sort of political strife in a given country. You've collected data from like social media on what's going on either end of the spectrum, and you're offering some novel insights into what the people in that country think about a particular topic. It could be that you've introduced a new algorithm or new mathematical model that you're doing, or it could be a new technique that gives better insight in social media data. So you really need to spend a lot of time thinking about what is your contribution. What can you offer the academic community from the skills you've learned in this course, or the topics that you can find to study online or on the internet. Once you've decided what that contribution is, then you need to package it in a good organization. What does that mean by good organization? You need to follow a very prescribed structure for how you communicate those findings because nobody is interested in your journey of discovery. Now, I can't emphasize that enough. Nobody cares about how you discovered whatever it is you learned. What they care about is how can you clearly communicate something that they can use, right? So you have to keep other-centric. You got to think about how am I communicating my work in a way that somebody else is going to find interesting, as opposed to thinking of it as a term paper where you're trying to tell me, the professor, all the work that you've put into the course and all the things you've learned, right? So that organization is critical. Contribution, organization. So let's talk about organization a little bit. There are 2 different types of organization. One would be for an academic presentation. The other would be for an academic paper. So on the left, we show the typical organization for a presentation. And you'll see that it's very similar to what we have for a paper. In both, you're going to have an introduction. What the introduction is covering is, what is the problem? Why is what I'm going to talk to you about interesting? So in the introduction, it's very important that you motivate your paper with a problem or an issue or a concern, that you succinctly say, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and you might want to say something about how the paper is organized, right? So that goes into the introduction. Then you're going to say, what have other people done to motivate this problem, and why is that insufficient? And that'll either go in the related works, where you'll say, hey, so-and-so tried to address this problem, and they did X, Y, Z, but it was insufficient because of, and you're citing the limitation. These people have tried to look at the problem, but their issue was, A, B, C, right? So you're addressing what other people have done and why it's insufficient. Then you're going to introduce your methodology or your proposed approach. And so this is where you're going to say, hey, this is what I am going to offer. This is what I'm going to do. You're laying out a plan. You must refrain from offering findings. So the trap here is you've gone through, and let's say your proposed contribution has 3 parts. What your natural tendency is to say, oh, I did whatever contribution A, and here's what I found. And then you want to say, I did contribution B, and here's what I found. Then I did contribution C, here's what I found. Don't do that. What you have to do is lay out your proposed approach or your methodology without any data or finding or results, right? So now, somebody should be able to take your methodology section and repeat your project on another application, right? So that proposed approach or methodology is nothing more than the plan of analysis. Now, if you were doing a presentation, you might go into experimental details about, how you set up your experiment that was unique to your problem. We typically don't do that in a paper. We just jump into that results and analysis. And so for the results and analysis, we are going to then say, here are the results that came from that methodology I just explained, and then we have a conclusion. Now, there's one other issue, right, which is, let's say you're using data, and you probably should use data. If the data is somebody else's data, right, so you've gone out to a website, you've gone out somewhere else, and you've found the data on an online source, then that data is going to go under the background or under the related works because you're explaining other people's data that you're using now to offer a new contribution. If, however, you've gone out and collected the data, you've scraped it, you've prepared it, you've run tests on subjects, then that data goes under methodology because it's data that you have collected. We're going to look at a couple example papers. In Blackboard, I have posted about 5 different example papers that you can use to look at to give you a sense of what we're talking about. I'm going to pull these up. So the first one was a paper that John and I did with Adam Reed, and this was his final paper a while back. I think this was in year 3 we were teaching this class. And what he did is he was correlating NBA team network centrality measures with game performance. So he was making a relationship between the social network on Twitter of NBA players and their on-court performance. And so you'll see that this follows a standard 2-column paper format, right? So you see the abstract is up here. He has introduction. Now, he did not include a background or related methods. So he basically truncated that, and that's probably not the best, but it's not horrible because what he was doing was somewhat novel. And so he introduces the problem. He then discusses the methods that he's going to use. And he's using this figure, I think, to illustrate the method. But he's still throwing out the formulas for centralization. And then you see he goes into results. And in the results, he breaks the results into a little bit more detail and throws those out there. And then he has a conclusion. And at the end, then references. Okay? And so his paper was 4 pages long, and that was accepted into the ASINAM conference, and he ended up going and presenting that in Barcelona. Here's another paper that came, I think, the previous semester, but same conference it was presented to, Evaluation of Political Party Cohesion using Exponential Random Graph Modeling. So what Bobby did is she went and pulled online sources of co-voting patterns of people in the House of Representatives. And so what she did is she, again, did an introduction. And in her introduction, what I really liked is see how she identifies research question 1, research question 2, research question 3. She clearly defines 3 research questions that she's going to explore in her paper. Then in the background situation, she goes over the related work. She then describes the exponential random graph model, which is what she is applying that's novel. And then she creates a data set section, and that's fine. She didn't put data set underneath background. She made a third section. Nothing wrong with that. And so the data collection, she basically says, where does she get the data, right? And then how did she create a network? And this is really why she did something as a separate section, because while another source has actually coded the co-voting patterns, nobody had actually turned that into network data. And so she then created a network from that. And so you can see that that's kind of like a hybrid between background and methodology. So that's where she did the way she did. Then she describes party cohesion analysis. This would be her methodology, but she just gave it a slightly more descriptive term. And so she describes how that is. And then these are where her results are, right? So now she's looking at party cohesion, and then she's looking at the research questions that she's answering with each of these sections. And then she does a discussion and conclusion to kind of finalize her paper, and then you see that there are references. She also added a future work, which is sometimes good to show, hey, what we're going to do in the future. So dormant bots was one that was not done actually part of the class, but I think it's a perfectly acceptable topic that we could have done in one of the semester projects. So this is looking at dormant bots in social media. And so here we see the introduction. We're talking about what's the problem of bots, and in a dormant bot we've defined as a social media account that has anomalous behavior but doesn't really post anything, is not really active in the discussion. And what we found is that accounts that have an interesting placement in the ecosystem but never say anything, they are able to manipulate the search engine optimization of what appears in people's feeds. So as we're describing that, we define the problem. We then look at the background, what other people have done, right? Then there's a clear method. Then there's the findings of what we found, and a lot of pictures in there. And then we have conclusions. And what's really interesting about that paper is that paper was rejected by the Twitter engineers on 2 different conferences. So you can judge where you feel it fits in compared to the others. But one of our colleagues actually took this paper and gave it to the FBI, running up to the midterm elections in 2018. And the FBI got a court order with this paper to require Twitter to suspend all the dormant bots, resulting in a 7% suspension of all global Twitter accounts and about 500 million drops in links and a 23% drop in Twitter stock prices. So when you use your Johns Hopkins email address and try and get a Twitter developer account, this is the paper why you can't get it done. This is not from the social media class, Rachel took that, but this is from a crowdsourcing class that she took the following semester. And so what we've done here is we've crowdsourced a bunch of data. And the thing that I wanted to show you here is you notice the paper format is slightly different. So this is a Springer format instead of an ACM or IEEE format. But she still has the introduction, a background, right? And then these are other people's equations for measuring disagreement when you're labeling data, the methods, the findings, and the conclusion. And then, of course, references. Okay? So this was a paper that I had done back, probably about over 10 years ago now. And this is looking at how might we get social network data from email. And so, again, you have an abstract, you have an introduction, you have a background. These pages are thrown in because my work was funded by the Army and it was presented at the Army Science Conference. So the Army throws this little form in the middle of your paper, which is a little bit awkward. But you'll see it continues. We have method. I don't know why there's a blank page there. Then there's results. And then there's conclusions, right? So hopefully what you've seen is that we've provided about 5 example papers. You've seen some formats. There's some information on the actual project instructions page that will tell you what conferences you might want to target. The specific format should be targeting whatever conference you want to go to. If you're going to a Springer conference, you might look at the Springer format. If you're trying to target an IEEE or ACM conference like ACE&AM or something like that, then you might target the 2-column format in your paper. We have 5 example papers for you, and then follow the format, right? Go introduction, background, methodology, results analysis, conclusion. Some deviation from that is okay, but generally try and follow that format. We're not interested in your journey of discovery, the order in which you found what you found. We're interested in how well you can communicate that succinctly and clearly. And it's about the contribution. What are you introducing that somebody didn't know before that they might find interesting? Good luck on your final papers. We wish you the best.